I was shocked when I learned that most of the practitioners I was meeting weren't collecting data, but they all had testimonials and they all had great anecdotes about all of these people that they were reversing chronic disease with. It is too challenging to collect this data and then do something with it. We built in some simple and some complex ways to do this inside the Vibility system. We have 45,000 records of patient data of pre and post outcomes and seeing the results they're getting. If a patient goes on a Vibility program, goes through the lifestyle changes and is taking Aptogenix supplements, we can predict the results that they are going to get at the end of that program.
You meet practitioners at conferences and people talk about their clinics. You don't know if the amazing patient outcome they're telling you about is a one-off, or is this the average increase that people are seeing in their practice?
It's something that actually drove me crazy.
Hello and welcome back to the Freedom RX podcast. I am the executive producer, James Maskell, and I'm here today with Seth Conger. He is the chief operating officer of Freedom Practice Coaching. And what we're going to learn about today is how Freedom Practice Coaching has gone about solving the problems dynamically that their practitioners have to make it easy for doctors and practitioners to build thriving, scalable practices, delivering exceptional care. So Seth, welcome back.
Thanks, James. Fun to be here. And it's going to be really fun to go through the history of how we've built the ecosystem that we have now today.
Yeah, well, let's jump into that. I mean, ecosystem, you hear that word banded around quite a lot in lots of different places now. I mean, ultimately, what I understand is that you're there at Freedom Practice Coaching. You know, you're helping practitioners building these practices. And over time, it starts to become clear that just being a coaching business can't do it all for practitioners, or it's not, you know, there are holes that need to be filled. And I'd love to just understand sort of the journey that you went on to understand what those holes were and how to solve them.
Yeah. So back in 2020, I sat down with John, our CEO, and Charlie, the founder of Freedom Practice Coaching. And we started to come up with this concept of what more could we do for the clients, for the practitioners that we serve. Now, I was a client at one point. And, you know, in another episode that we've recorded, I tell that entire story. But from 2017 through the end of 2018, we were clients. So I had this great lens on what is that journey that a typical practitioner group goes through at those different stages, and what more is needed to actually run a business, right? Freedom Practice Coaching had this great history of developing partnerships. And the way that we look at partnerships are, we teach something, but we don't implement or do it. So a great analogy there, or a way to look at that, would be like a marketing company, right? So we teach you how to write ads. We teach you how to write the ad copy and all the different pieces. We let you know what channels you should probably be on. But what we don't do is actually post those ads for you. We don't actually go and do any of the media buying efforts. And so we have marketing partners that do that on behalf of our clients, using our material that we give to our clients, right? So we started looking at this and understanding there are some areas that are just so critical to the business of cash pay medicine that really it is an area that we should actually have a little bit more control over, right? And so the idea was, when you're in a brand new business, or if you're in startup mode, all you're trying to do is sell more patients and bring them in and build a program or a membership or whatever underlying business model that you have. You're trying to understand how I can get that off the ground, right? But what you're not thinking about is what happens when I'm bringing in 8 new clients per month or 10 new clients per month. All of a sudden, there are new challenges that you're dealing with that are actually holding the practice back more than just selling more new people. And so that's what we started mapping out. And we said, what if we can build a ecosystem. And it's really funny to use that term because we just kind of threw that name around, the ecosystem. We're still kind of just throwing that name around. It's definitely not an official term, but it sounds a whole lot better than flywheel. So we said, what if we can build an ecosystem that really truly supports these practitioners at every stage of their journey? And we can add on to this ecosystem as we find greater and greater challenges down the road, where more of our clients say, we need help with this, right? We need help with X, Y, or Z. And I know we're going to jump into those companies today, but the primary, I guess, rule that we had for that was A, it must be needed by more than 50% of our clients, right? So more than 50% of our clients must need to solve this challenge or this problem. We must have an expertise in that area that allows us to have an advantage in providing that good or service to our clients at either a better rate or more efficiency or a higher reliability. And then also there's got to be an aligned incentive in there, right? I really think about how do we align incentives between all parties to ensure that if one person wins, everybody wins, right? And so we looked at building the ecosystem through that lens of let's make sure that there's not just an aligned incentive between us, the owners of the company, and the practitioners or our clients, but there's also an aligned incentive for their patients, right? So there's got to be that kind of trio of incentives in order to move this forward. And those are kind of the rule sets that we decided on very early on when we were sketching things out on a whiteboard and drawing, concentric circles and how they fit together for the ecosystem.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, the problems yourself because you were a client. So how did you go about deciding where to start?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem, right, once you solve the sales and marketing problem, which is how do I attain customers in the first place? That is the number one problem. And if you're a practice, if you're a cash-based practice, and you're having a struggle or a challenge attracting patients in the first place, you have to solve that problem before you solve anything else, right? Do not pass go, do not collect $200 or $2,000 or more before you get to that next space. So really the focus has to be that. After you move forward from there, the problem starts ending up being delivery, right? And so you start adjusting for time, practitioner time, rather than just dollars coming in the front door. And so the biggest time suck, I guess, honestly, was delivering the same message over and over and over again about lifestyle to the patients who are coming in, right? If a practitioner and they're the owner of the business, is having the same conversation about why gluten is bad or why they need to go on an elimination diet or why we need to clear out our cupboards and actually stock our shelves with things that are not highly processed foods. And they're having that conversation 3, 4, 5 times a day with every new patient that they come in. That is something that we can create a process around, we can automate, and we can move down the chain into something that is off of the books of the time for that practitioner. And so those were the areas that we looked at first. So Freedom Practice Coaching was attacking that in an interesting way beforehand. They would actually give their clients a 3-ring notebook that had a curriculum that Charlie Webb used in his practice years before, right? And then they, the practitioner, the client would actually make copies of that and maybe change some words. Obviously, there was a digital version of that as well. They would change some words. They would print out their own 3-ring binders and they would hand them to the patients. And in 2021, this seemed a little bit archaic, right? There was different ways of doing this. And so the idea of digital curriculum seemed really important and critical at this time. If we can offload the education of lifestyle medicine into a digital format that also keeps the patient entertained and encourages action, then that is going to save not just a couple hours, it's going to save dozens of hours a week for the practitioner, right? The other way that we were solving that problem at that time was group classes. But group classes were wonderful until COVID hit. And when COVID hit and everything went online, all of a sudden group classes started to fragment a little bit and fall apart. And so there was this concept of we need to be able to deliver a digital curriculum that is extremely high value, but also looks like it is that practitioner's digital curriculum. And that was kind of the first, I would say, challenge that we decided to tackle, which turned into the company Vibility.
Super cool. Yeah. Well, let's jump into Vibility a little bit more, because I think that I'd love to, to really understand, how it comes around. So how do you create something that looks like it's from each of these different practitioners, and how do you sort of make it so that it reflects on the practice that you're working with?
Yeah. So the concept behind Vibility was we have to deliver a extremely high quality lifestyle education that is also easy to manipulate and change from the lens of the practitioner, right? Then we have to be able to white label it so it looks like the practitioner. And from there, we have to be able to gather extreme data points throughout this entire journey, not just on the progress of people making it through this course, but also understanding where they are in their satisfaction and where they are in their health outcomes along the way. And we have to be able to do this at a cost that is better than, significantly better than the practitioners delivering this themselves or hiring somebody to deliver this in a physical way. It turns out everybody wants to have a course, right? That is a thing in this space. Everybody would love to have a multidisciplinary clinic. They want a yoga studio and a juice bar in their practice, and they also want to have a course with their name and face on it. What they realize with those hard, tangible assets is having a yoga studio in your practice costs a lot of money with rent. You got to bring the people in. You've got to do all that stuff. But there's this distinction that's not quite made when you're talking about building a course, where you're like, well, I have all this information in my head. I will sit in front of a camera. I'll talk for a while, and we'll turn that into a course. And it turns out that building a course, even today in the age of AI and all these amazing automation tools, costs about $150,000 in 6 months of effort, with studio rentals and editing and scripting and everything that you have to do to go through that. Let alone you have to put that on a platform that charges you licensing fees to keep that going, and handle all of the manual interactions behind the scenes of actually delivering that content to people and tracking them through. So we realized this because multiple people had attempted that effort themselves and not gotten very far. I was one of those people. I was like, great, we'll build a course. It wasn't happening very fast, right? We put that on we put that back on the idea shelf pretty quickly. So that's really where we said, we've got to be able to deliver this white labeled, personalized, and editable framework, right? And so we do that by having a pretty complex, robust back end that's called I'm going to get a little technical here, James, but a multi-tenant system, which means every single system functions as its own practice, so to speak. But also all of that information can roll up at top so that we can make broad changes, right? If we want to add a module, we can choose to add that to everybody, or we can choose to add that to a single practice. And it's the same thing on the data side, right? So we wanted to make the system flexible enough that it could feel like that practitioner's own system, and then also robust enough so it would be able to collect really impactful data along the way, and then also be able to work as a communication platform. So along the way of the Vibility journey, we realized there were other important problems that we needed to solve for our practitioners. One of those was that data piece, right? If you're trying to collect all of your data in your EMR, but your patient is spending most of their time watching your course and coming in for in-person visits, a lot of the times you end up missing that great opportunity to collect information about either their satisfaction or their outcomes at the primary moment where you want to collect that information, right? If your front desk is trying to think about, I got to give this paper form to somebody as they're walking out of the room, you're likely to miss those. And then you've got to scan that in. You've got to, try to calculate it. You do all of that stuff. So we have automated that and allow the practitioners to choose what of these clinical scales they want to send out and what of these satisfaction scores and net promoter scores for surveys do they want to send out to the patient and when, so we can automate that process and then feed the data back to the client, to our practitioners, right? And that is turned in, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later on, but like one of the real goals of the ecosystem is to be able to help prove the effectiveness and the efficacy of the functional medicine space. But we can't do that without the data. So this was a way for us to start collecting that in mass. Also, we said at some point we're going to need to be able to communicate in a bidirectional or multi-directional way with the patient and the practitioner or the practitioner's team. And health coaching was very, very much on the rise when we came up with this concept. So we said eventually we need to have a place where health coaches can be in the loop with this educational information and then also the data collection that we're doing. What we realized with that is that when you're a new business, one of the hard things is making that first big hire, right? And with a health coach, if you're only bringing in 1 or 2 new clients or even 4 or 5 new patients per month, that's actually not enough to keep a full-time health coach 100% busy. So you're over leveraging yourself as a business to bring on a full-time health coach to only see a dozen or 24 patients, right? But sharing a health coach between practices can get a little complicated. So what we did on top of that is we actually built a health coaching division where we hire the health coaches, again, in a white labeled format. So those health coaches function as members of our practitioners' teams if they choose to use that product line as well. And they're all trained on the curriculum that we have in the Vibility platform, right? So they're expert health coaches who have expertise on the curriculum and those paths that we have with different nutritional plans and different exercise plans and all of that. And they can step in and be flexible with the amount of patients that you're bringing in, which allows the practice just to focus on the business side and those really high impact individual personalized visits, rather than the things that can be done in a more automated or repeatable fashion.
Yeah, I can imagine if you are gathering data across all of these different clinics, that there's some insight that is gained, right? Because one of the things that I've noticed from being in functional medicine is that, you meet practitioners at conferences and people talk about their clinics, but you don't really know what's happening, right? You don't know how they're doing financially. You don't know if the amazing patient outcome they're telling you about is a one-off, or is this the average increase that people are seeing in their practice? What sort of interesting data have you been able to come across from, tracking this across all of your clinics?
Well, mostly we suggest just managing your business off of anecdotes. That's kind of how we go about it. No, it's something that actually drove me crazy, right? And I didn't realize this until probably 3/4 of the way through my journey as being a part of a functional medicine practice. I came from a very different world, right? I came from a world where we had to track things by the minute. We had to track things, every single lead. There were so many dollars flowing around that were impacted by the data we were collecting that it was just a forced habit to understand that the data science piece of this, we needed to be managing our business from the metrics, but we also needed to be understanding and getting a really great flow from our patients from the data that we were collecting from them as well. So I was shocked when I learned that most of the practitioners I was meeting when I started going to conferences weren't collecting data, but they all had testimonials and they all had great anecdotes about all of these people that they were reversing chronic disease with. And it was just a big curiosity, right? Of why are people not doing this? What I realized is because it's too hard. It is too challenging to collect this data and then do something with it. And then on top of that, a lot of practitioners say, well, I'm getting 5 to 10 new patients per month here. Is that really going to move the needle? Is that enough data? So is it worth all the time and effort to be collecting all of this data? Because it's just not going to do anything, right? And I think most practitioners are getting into the space because they want to change medicine. When we go through our vision and mission exercises with new clients at Freedom Practice Coaching, 80%, right, have something in that vision statement or that mission statement that they are looking to actually change healthcare. But those same people have not been collecting any outcome data on the back end. And it's really hard to blend the two of those together if you don't have objective proof and you just have stories, right? Stories are amazing and they will sell. And we really encourage our practitioners to collect testimonials and to collect these stories because that is the emotional part that is going to move somebody into a program or a membership. But having that objective data is actually playing the long game. So we built in some simple and some complex ways to do this inside the Vibility system. The most simple way is you have a symptom form that it goes out on a regular basis. You can track somebody's symptoms that they put in, right? I have these 10 symptoms on a scale of 1 to 10. And here's what I want to track over time. That's a very simple way. We also have more complex ways like feeding very specific standardized clinical scales that are peer reviewed so that we can take those things like a PROMIS 29 score and we can compare that of how a clinic is not only doing to the other clinics in our group, which is amazing for benchmarking, but also how are they doing against the VA, right? Or how are they doing against the Cleveland Clinic? And we can show those improvements and we can show our practitioners like how great they are doing at actually achieving those outcomes with our patients. And over time, that just helps us iterative cycle that we're trying to do, which again goes back to those aligned incentives, right? If the incentives at the end of the day are based off of the outcome of the patient, and that's what we're building towards, then everybody's going to win if that's what we're focused on.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's in the name, right? So Freedom RX podcast, Freedom Practice Coaching. I can imagine that if you take care of the health coaching, the patient education, and the data management, it's creating a lot of freedom for these practitioners.
It is. Yeah. It creates a leverage where they can focus on the areas that are going to help get them to the next stage and help them create whatever level of multidimensional wealth they want, right? Some practitioners are focused on money, some are focused on time, some are focused on impact. Most of them are a blend of all of those, relationships as well. But no one is focused on delivering the same message over and over and over again, 10 hours a day, when they could be having more impact or generating more of that, multidimensional wealth in other ways.
All right. So you have partners for some part. You have marketing partners that can get the butts in seats. You have something like Vibility that's taking care of some of the delivery of care. You've got those two things locked in. What comes next in the thinking process and what did you want to solve next?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of opportunities to solve problems for these practitioners, right? So it's really picking and choosing what do we have the bandwidth for, where do we have the expertise, and what's the biggest lever that we can pull for the benefit of our practitioners. And we have a group called Legacy. Legacy is our largest practices and I would say most seasoned practitioners who have been in the FPC community for quite some time. We do introduce some new practices directly into Legacy if they meet certain criteria. But all of these businesses have annual revenues over $1 million. They have a sizable team. They're profitable. They're definitely not in chaos. Although every business has red flags and fires that they have to fight no matter what the size, right? But these businesses are really moving into an area where they're looking to create a legacy, which is why we named that program of that level. And the other concept behind Legacy was we want to be building things with our clients, right? We don't want to just build stuff and hand it to them. We actually want to be building it with them. So we're constantly taking feedback of everything we do, whether it's on the business coaching side, whether it's on the Vibility side for the curriculum, how do we make this better? But also we wanted to design and build something together. And I think when I joked earlier about everybody wants a yoga studio and everyone wants a course and everybody wants a juice bar, another thing that most practitioners want is they want their own supplement, right? They've been around this for so long. They use supplements. They are very, very interested in these ingredients. They spend a lot of time researching this stuff, and they would love to design and build their own supplement. Well, there's also a large cost behind that, right? So just as there's $150,000 in 6 months to build a course, you want to build a supplement, you've got to find the suppliers for the ingredients. You have to find a co-manufacturer to make that for you. You have to go through multiple different rounds of figuring out how these ingredients blend together, all of the price points. Then you have to actually buy like 5,000 of these bottles and figure out the demand, who you're going to sell these to. So there's a huge upfront time, energy, and expertise cost in order to go down that road. And if you're not a supplement formulator, you're a practitioner, there is a difference with that, right? So what we said is, what if we can crowdsource our group? And what if we can take some of the best practitioners and some of the best businesses in our entire community and design a supplement line with them that is aligned to everything else we do? So again, aligned incentives, right? Across the board. We said, we're going to take the Vibility curriculum that is used the most because we understand which courses have the highest use rate, that is already getting a certain level of patient outcomes. And if we can design a supplement protocol that aligns with that course and then track those supplements over time, then we can actually see the entire spectrum of patient care, right? We can see the interactions with the practitioners. We can see their progress through these courses and the lifestyle changes that they're making. And we have an impact on the supplements that they're taking, both the quality. And then, of course, for the practitioners, we can keep that cost as low as possible for them at a wholesale rate so that they're not dealing with the fluctuations of the marketplace. And we went out and decided to build this company, Aptogenix. And the fun thing about that is we decided to build it with our practitioners. So we have a supplement formulation board. We have a business committee, and we actually offered to all of our clients, and still do today, that they can invest in Aptogenix. So 49% of the business is owned by our clients, right? So they have a vested interest in the business. They have a vested interest in the actual formulation of the product. They can see the measurements of the outcomes that are coming from those products in real time. We're in constant iteration, and they're benefiting by keeping the price at a wholesale level where everybody else is deciding to raise their prices or change their formulations or do this or do that. And then they get to benefit from being a shareholder of the company too. And one of the primary rules that we set with Aptogenix is this is a practitioner grade and a practitioner-only channel opportunity, right? And until we get to a point where the board votes on it, and that is a group of the practitioners where they say, we want to open this to the outside, it is only sold to practitioners who are inside of our ecosystem. So we maintain such a high quality, but also you can't get the supplement anywhere else. And so it presents a really cool opportunity for all of our practitioners of basically having like a private label level supplement that they were involved designing, which you don't get to do with a private label, right? You just put your name on somebody else's bottle. But this is like they got to design the supplement, and they're a part of that brand, and it creates that uniqueness with their patients where they know what the supplement's going to do, and they know how it's going to get that interaction. So back in 2022, that was the effort that we took on because Vibility was fully launched, up and running, moving very nicely down the road with a huge amount of utilization in our ecosystem. And so we took on the effort to build Aptogenix at that time.
Cool. All right. Well, spill the beans, right? You got the way to track the outcomes. The products go alongside the Vibility programs. Millions of dollars of supplements have been sold and used and taken by patients. What happens when you put someone on Aptogenix and Vibility?
Yeah. So it's actually really cool. And it's amazing when you get to see a concept come to reality, right? And again, this was just back in very late 2020 and early 2021, this was a concept that we were going to be able to solve the challenges of our practitioners, especially the growing businesses. As they bring in more new patients, have bigger challenges, we can solve that on the back end with Vibility. Then we were going to solve the challenge of these raising prices and the chipping away at the margin that a lot of the other supplement companies and groups and dispensaries are doing for all, for good reasons, right? Providing convenience, but also chipping away at that margin. So we said, we can make our practitioners more money. We can save them more time. And in the mix of that, we can own the quality of these products to ensure the highest outcome. And so now we actually get to see that in real life. And, I was just talking with our CTO, Vinny, the other day, who owns all of our data. And we have 45,000 records of patient data of pre and post outcomes of watching these, all anonymized, of course, but watching these patients move through the programs and seeing the results they're getting. And that's getting very exciting because we can feed that data back to our practitioners and they can use that for their own resources of actually tweaking their program, tweaking supplement protocols, or even use that in their marketing efforts to show this is the real objective data and the real outcomes that people are getting, not just anecdotes, but across their entire practice. So the dream has really become the reality that if a patient, right, if a patient goes on a Vibility program, goes through the lifestyle changes and is taking Aptogenix supplements, we can predict the results that they are going to get at the end of that program. And that's amazing. Like, what a cool leap to be able to have that and then feed that information back to our practitioners. And I think from here, there's so much more we can be doing with that data, with the interactions with our practitioners. And then also we're starting to think about how do we use this, big data grouping that we have to start shifting the industry a little bit and showing them that these outcomes are very real in very large numbers.
So I always wanted to know, how did your hair get gray so quickly? But now I know with running 3 companies at the same time. And, I guess I just want to talk into that. It sounds like a lot. But ultimately you've got this foundation of having a successful company with Freedom Practice Coaching. What are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way from starting 2 new companies and now managing 3?
Yeah, so it's very, very interesting. And if you haven't listened, for the listener, if you haven't listened to our health practice formula episode, check that out because we actually walk through all the different stages of scale, right? We walk through startup, we walk through growth stage, we walk through scaling stage businesses, what to do, what not to do, what to continue in each of those phases. When I started at Freedom Practice Coaching, we're very well established in the growth phase, right? And when you're in the growth phase, you can start thinking about things like new lines of business. When you're in the startup phase, you just need to be thinking about finding product market fit and getting to cash flow positive, right? But when you're in the growth phase, you have optionality of doing a few other things. What you don't have optionality of is starting something within that then sucks all of the attention and efforts of all of your best people into it. So when we made this decision that we were going to start another company, it wasn't just another product line within FPC. It was actually a separate entity. And we did this for a number of reasons, but one of those reasons is, guys, startups are black holes. They will suck everything into them for good reasons and bad. 1, you're back into reactive mode, but 2, it's also exciting, right? You have a new thing that you're building. Everybody wants to get involved. Everybody wants a piece of the action. You want to be working towards this exciting thing because the growth stage company has kind of gotten into this I don't want to say it's boring because it's definitely not boring, but you're doing the same thing over and over again because you have a model that works, right? So let's go do something new. So what we did is we said, we are going to allocate some time from a couple of executives who can manage multiple things at once And then we're going to shelter this off from the rest of the team until we get it up and going. So we will hire our own team for this business in the very active roles that are helping run this until we get up and going. And so that's what we did with both of these companies. So we did that with Vibility, and as soon as it was up to cash flow positive and running and really moving well, we at that point moved it in to the ecosystem, and then blended leadership team. We got some of the economies of scale and efficiencies by bringing in, technology across the board, data across the board, finance across the board. And then we went out and we did the same thing with Aptogenix. And so managing 3 growth stage companies at once is very, very different than managing 3 startups at once. Because when you're in a growth stage company, you can hire leadership, right? So there is a head of business for each one of those companies who basically owns that business and that company and the intermingling of that within the rest of the ecosystem. So it's really cool how it all functions today. And yes, there was very much this moment in time where we were moving a growth stage business forward with accelerated growth while also playing around in startup mode, right? And trying to get something up to product market fit and manufacturing supplements for the first time and writing curriculum and courses and trying to get that out while building, a technology platform behind the scenes. And it was a really exciting time. But I think we got the cadence down for that. And I just would suggest to anybody who has a business that they feel is stable enough where they can be creating something new, silo it off if you can, and really allow it to grow on its own. Because if you don't, it will very slowly start pulling all the resources from the thing that is keeping you stable, and that's usually a recipe for disaster. So that's the way we built those.
Well, I've lived that disaster personally, so I understand that very clearly.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah. So I guess just to sort of bring this to a close, I mean,
yeah,
has this talk us through the success of this strategy, right? Talk us through, what does it mean for a new practitioner who comes in, they want to build a practice doing functional medicine, or they want to get organized, and now you have these, these tools, these resources. Is it easier? Does it create more freedom?
Yeah, I think there's different stages, right? So we bring in practices to Freedom Practice Coaching at every different stage. So let's talk about the new businesses and startups first. When they come in, I think there's a big breath of fresh air that we have these assets that are literally part of our ecosystem that can immediately get them up and running in day one, right? If you are a brand new business and you're attracting your first patient into a program, and then as the moment you sell that program, you have this shock of how am I going to deliver on the promise that I just made, right? And Vibility and Aptogenix solve that problem for the new businesses and startup businesses. It just outsources the ability. And as a practitioner, I'm basically, I hesitate to say the word guarantee, but I'm coming as close as you can guarantee in medicine if the patient actually takes action steps to achieving a positive outcome with this individual. And then I, as the practitioner, also have to do the work, right, that I promised to help get them there as well. But in many cases, it just speeds up that path to getting through that messy startup stage so much faster, because you have a reliable, proven system that does a whole lot of that heavy lifting for you on the back end. A lot of the growth stage businesses that we bring in, they see this and they say, man, I wish I had that when I started, right? And oh man, that would have made my life so much easier if I had just had this system rather than trying to cobble all of this together on my own. And they see the benefit of that as well. And so it's not, the interesting thing about this is it's not for 100% of the people. And we don't try to enforce that everybody in the ecosystem uses Vibility or Aptogenix. Again, we built these for very specific reasons that would be aligned with the practitioners and their needs. Some people have already solved those problems in unique and interesting ways. And if they have, that's fantastic, right? And as we continue to grow the ecosystem, we're likely to solve more challenges and more problems. And as we start chipping away at things, there may be less and less need for that because people have already gotten around to figuring out how to do X or Y or Z. But I think there's some importance in that. The other part, James, that I want to mention in this is, let's go back to those aligned incentives. So one thing that was really important for us is when we talk about business coaching, that is a flat fee, right? There is a flat fee for business coaching. We do business coaching the same way as we teach how to build a program, which is an all-inclusive nature, right? So it's up to you as the client practitioner to get all you can out of this program. And it doesn't cost more the more you participate or the more you take advantage of the services that we offer, right? We don't charge per coaching call. We don't charge per workshop. We don't charge for our events. It's just all about getting the result that you want, which is also how we suggest you do it with your patients, right? On the Vibility and Aptogenix side, it's a little bit of a different model, right? So there is a per patient licensing fee for the courses, and there is obviously a per patient supplement fee, right? You pay for the supplements that patient is using. So the cool thing about that is it actually incentivizes us on the coaching side to help the practices grow, right? If practices grow and they're using Vibility and Aptogenix, then Vibility and Aptogenix do better. So it creates that really nice aligned incentive with everybody that if we build really good quality products that get great outcomes and those patients are getting great outcomes, and if we're doing a good job on the business coaching side and our clients are taking action on the advice and the consulting and the coaching we're giving, then the whole thing gets to grow together. And all of that just has a bigger impact on the industry and an impact on more lives being transformed.
That's really cool. Well, look, I really appreciate the take on this. And I think, if you're listening to this, just think about how transformational it could be for you to have your patient education, your patients educated by a system that doesn't rely on your time. Like, how much freedom would that create? What other tools do you see as being essential for growing your business? And maybe it's time to have a conversation about this because ultimately, you don't have to be an island, right? You can join into a community where these kind of problems are being solved and, where practitioners know how to solve these things. And Seth, I'm just really appreciative of you of, taking on these challenges. It's easier to do less. It's harder to do more. And I know each of these businesses comes with its own unique challenge and so forth. But I do see, how much of an impact it makes to solve some of these key challenges, keep practitioners focused on what's most important to them, and making it easier for people to get to a state of health and freedom in their practice. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. This has been part of a series that we're doing here at Freedom RX to speak to the leaders here at Freedom Practice Coaching and understand what are they up to, why are they doing it, what's important. And Seth, thanks so much for coming in and sharing. If this resonates and you're ready to take your practice to the next level, you can click the link in our video description. You can head to freedompracticecoaching.com. You can book a strategy call with one of our team. This process is free. There's a ton of value in the process. We'll get to that in another episode. But there is value in really understanding where you are in the process, where you need to go. And that is something that is offered by the team in the journey inwards to Freedom Practice Coaching. So whether you're listening on a preferred podcast platform, YouTube, subscribe to be the first to know when we bring out new content. We're going to have regular new content coming forward. Seth, thanks very much for being here. This is the Freedom RX podcast, and we'll see you next time.